I'm going to, over the course of the next year or two, have a number of suggestions on how we can do exactly what the founders said in the Declaration of Independence. Alter certain aspects of how our government functions. It's clear by now that we lack, in so many of our public officials, elected and appointed, people of virtue and integrity and prudence. The Supreme Court's decision in Obamacare, in the Arizona immigration case, the D.C. Circuit panel's decision on greenhouse gases and cap and trade. These are outrageous acts by public officials who've lost their way. Over time, people with lifetime appointments, people who are elected to office and get to serve for a long period of time, they become cynical and deceitful in their view, not just of our constitutional system, but of the purpose of this government, to protect you, the individual, and the civil society. One way to try and address this, and I'll have many down the road, is to ensure more opportunity for others to participate in our governing process. That is, to break up the entrenched ruling class and to do it by constitutional design rather than happenstance from time to time. Well, for me, folks, this Obamacare ruling by the Supreme Court is the last straw. It's the last straw, and the sabotage and the dishonesty by the Chief Justice is the last straw. We just can't rely anymore on one person to save us or save the country. It's not the way it was supposed to be, and it's not the way it should be. Such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Well, like you, I cherish the Constitution. I have studied the Constitution since I was 13 years old. I'm 54 now. I revere it. You revere it. But look what they've done to it. They use it against itself. They use it against us. They change it. They play with it. They don't even wait to amend it. They amend it themselves. Congress amends it without going through the amendment process. The President, through his imperial actions, he's amending it without going through the amendment process. The court amends it, and in each time, every case, we lose more and more of our liberty. These people lack integrity. They lack virtue. And of course, they lack prudence. And the American people deserve better than this. So I will have a number of suggestions over time, but let me start with this. And I mentioned this briefly the other day. The President of the United States is term limited, as you well know. Well, the other two branches need to be term limited too. And I've written about the need to term limit Supreme Court justices. When I wrote that in Men in Black, some professors also picked up the ball and made a similar argument. But I'm convinced now more than ever that we cannot sit around praying and hoping that one justice will do the right thing. Our government shouldn't be left to that. Our freedom shouldn't be left to that. And John Roberts is not a king. He's one of 312 million Americans. 9 justices. They're human beings. They're imperfect human beings, just like us. Their judgment is as wise and as flawed as ours. They're no wiser or dumber than the rest of us. The reason they're there is quite simple. It's to faithfully uphold the Constitution. if they're going to sit there like masterminds, 5 of them, sometimes 6 of them, and issue edicts to impose their personal policy preferences, that's no longer acceptable. And they've been doing it now for 100 years. I think we should fix the number of Supreme Court justices at 9. As you know, the Constitution doesn't have a fixed number. They should have staggered terms. This would have to be implemented gradually, but we need a constitutional amendment, of course. And by the way, we need systemic changes to reestablish our constitutional republic. What I'm suggesting is in response to those who are destroying the Constitution in order to help strengthen the very foundation of that document. 2 appointees every 4 years. And I'm borrowing these thoughts from Professors Calabresi and Lindgren. I believe they shouldn't serve more than 15-year terms. And after that, they're done. If a justice dies during the course of the 15 years, then a president can nominate an individual to finish that term. 15 years, 9 justices, staggered terms. That means a president, if he serves for 4 years, gets 2 picks. If he serves for 8 years, he gets 4. I also believe we need to term limit Congress. 12 years in the House, maximum. 12 years in the Senate, maximum. And the Senate needs to change, too. I'll get back on this when we come back.
This is Radio Free America on the Mark Levin Show. Call now, 877-381-3811.
We cannot allow generation after generation of public officials appointed and elected to deny us our Constitution, to deny us our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Now, I know people get behind these microphones and they want to do happy talk, or they'll tell you the situation is dire, but they don't want to talk about solutions. I'm in the solution business. I'm in the information and solution business. There's got to be a way out of this. And there are ways. And it's going to take a long time. But we can do this. The Founding Fathers did it. That's why we're all off tomorrow to think about it. So, as I say, we have a situation now where we have politicians and public officials, whether they be judges or senators or what have you, not all, of course, but too many, who lack virtue and integrity and prudence. And you know what else? We're a big country. We have a lot of people who do have integrity and virtue and prudence. And they should have an opportunity to serve. But we can't leave it to happenstance anymore. That's my point. We need to break up the entrenched ruling class by constitutional design. By constitutional design. I mean, I was thinking about it during the break. Congress passes Obamacare in violation of the Commerce Clause, with the support of the President of the United States. And the Supreme Court, 5 justices, violate the Constitution to uphold Obamacare under the tax clauses. But all 3 branches of the federal government, elected and unelected, insist on imposing this tyranny on us. They insist on it. Against our will, against our wishes. And they know it's against our will and our wishes. And they impose it on us anyway, putting aside all the legal speak and all the rest of it. That's the bottom line. Obamacare is tyranny. It's absolutely unnecessary for 85% of the American people. And yet they're imposing it on us. And at every level it's a disaster. Financial, private, health care, and all the power that flows to these people who lack virtue and integrity and prudence. That's why every branch of the federal government is supporting it, is promoting it against your will, because you're the target of their designs, the individual. You're the target. You need to be reshaped. You need to be molded. You need to comply. If we're going to reach utopia, right? Utopia, which is hell on earth. So as I said, the President of the United States lives with limited terms, and he's still a very powerful man, isn't he? Because it was felt after FDR, who broke the Washington tradition of no more than 2 terms because that's what utopian statists do, that we needed a constitutional fix to that. Well, we need a constitutional fix for the other 2 branches, too. So 9 justices, staggered terms, 2 appointed every 4 years. That's every presidential term. President gets 2 nominees. 15-year terms. There are more complications to that, but that's good enough for now. Then I said, as we were closing the last segment, Congress. Congress needs to be term limited now. Now, we would grandfather in those who are there, grandfather in so they don't have all these legal cases they can bring, grandfather in the current members of the court and so on, and it would take a long time to get a constitutional amendment passed. And guess what? We'd have to get it out of Congress first. Well, Mark, we can have a convention. That another day I'll talk about. But right now, let's just stay focused. Going forward, if we had a constitutional amendment, no person in the Senate could serve more than 12 years. No person in the House could serve more than 12 years. And this is crucial, and I don't understand why it would be considered controversial, but for a lot of people it is. No more direct election of United States senators. We would repeal the 17th Amendment. The states have to have a say in the federal government. We need the states to be a buffer against the federal government. We need the states to be a buffer against a centralized, coercive federal government. So the states need to have a say. That was the point of the Senate in the first place. And yet through populism and progressivism at the turn of the century, the last one, there was this growing effort for direct election of senators that began. And where's it gotten us? The House of Representatives was called the People's House. And it is. And that's where it should be. The Senate should be where the states have a say in the federal government. The federal government they created by ratifying the Constitution. And no senator elected by state legislatures. No senator should serve more than 12 years. No member of the House should serve more than 12 years. Because there are millions and millions of wonderful people in this country who are smart, who are wise, who have good judgment, who ought to have an opportunity to show what they can do too. Because right now the system is clogged up with hangers-on, with wheelers and dealers, and with too many people who lack virtue and integrity and prudence. Look all around you. You know I'm right. They're destroying our country from within. So this is one of the things I would recommend. I have one other thought. When it comes to the courts and Congress. And I wrote about this in Men in Black 7 or so years ago, too. One other thought. I believe a supermajority of both houses of Congress, that is 2/3, should have the power to veto a Supreme Court decision. Oh, I know this sounds radical, but bear with me. It's hard to get 2/3 of the members of either house to do anything. But 2/3. And the rationale is the same that the framers of the Constitution used when creating the congressional override of a presidential veto. They felt in the end in the end, the president shouldn't have the final say over legislation. Congress should. And as much as I detest the Congress that we defeated in 2010, the fact is, we changed that House of Representatives, didn't we? And we're going to change this Senate, aren't we? But we can't change the Supreme Court. And I'm not saying we should. I don't favor direct elections of the court. I don't favor majoritarianism in every respect either. So what I'm saying is we need to rebalance the situation. So just as the House and the Senate have the final say on legislation, with the ability to override a presidential veto, I believe Congress should have the power with 2/3 vote to override the Supreme Court. And there'd be some complexities in that, too. How much time do they have to vote? Shouldn't be forever. Maybe within 12 months or 24 months of a Supreme Court decision, so we have stability, so people can plan based on what the law and the Constitution holds. But the system has to be fixed because the people who are in the system now are abusing it. And applying the same principles as the framers to ensure that one branch is actually working against the other, to ensure as best we can that people with integrity are serving in high office, to ensure first and foremost that our individual sovereignty, that the rule of law, that our private property rights, which represent your intellectual and physical activity as a living human being, are preserved. Because I'm telling you right now, with the president being imperial and issuing edicts, with Congress passing unconstitutional laws, with the Supreme Court blowing holes through the Constitution, our liberty's hanging by a thin thread. Oh, that doesn't mean you won't be able to go to the movies or buy an iPad or do those things you want to. What it means is they're going to control the aspects of your life that matter. Health care, pensions, job security, financial security, the security of the currency, and on down the road. We have a government today that has destroyed it's created the Social Security system and is destroying it. Created the Medicare system and is destroying it. Created the Medicaid system and is destroying it. And they use lies and deceit to continue to promote this. There's not one serious reform coming from the President of the United States to deal with any of this. Instead, he took the first opportunity he had with supermajorities in the House and the Senate to pass Obamacare, the biggest destroyer of individual liberty, let alone medicine, this nation has ever and will ever know. And he did it because he knew he had a temporary supermajority that couldn't be stopped. And here we sat around just assuming that there'd be 5 fellow citizens on the Supreme Court who would see it that way, who could put an end to this. But there were only 4. There were only 4, because one just wasn't up to the job. Instead, he looks to promoting his own legacy. Instead, he fancies himself John Marshall. He's nothing close to John Marshall. And he didn't just stab the dissenters in the back, he stabbed every citizen in this country in the back. And John Roberts is not a fool. He knows exactly what he did, which makes it 100 times worse. But we don't have to sit around and stand for this year after year, decade after decade. I'm going to have some future ideas. I'm spending a lot of time thinking this through. Doesn't mean you'll agree with all of them. Doesn't mean over time that all of them will work. But I'm looking at systemic changes here that will reinvigorate our constitutional republic, that'll bring our Constitution back, or at least help to the extent that we can. But we have to bust loose from this ruling class that pretends it doesn't even exist while it rules over us. We're going to think like the founders now. We're going to think like the framers of the Constitution now. We're going to think like the founders who created the Declaration of Independence. We're going to think like the framers who created the Constitution of the United States. We refer to them, we talk about them, we read about them, we read what they did. Now let's really, really take those lessons to heart in a law-abiding and civil manner. But let's do it. There's nothing that can stop us if our numbers grow. Army of patriots. Paul and Paulette Revere's. That's who you are. I've told you that for years.